I think there's a couple things wrong with Star Trek right now. As much as I still try to cheerlead it and try to look for the positives in shows like Discovery, does not mean that I do not have some serious misgivings with how they've gone about treating the franchise, even more so than how they've treated the fans. And something that kind of gets ignored, or I don't really ever notice anyone bring up. But I mean, yes, they say that the movies, the reboot, is creating an alternate timeline, and that Discovery is quote unquote set in the original timeline, even though it does not at all seem to be, and seems to feel, in terms of the cinematics of it, like it belongs in the JJ timeline. Is that the really reality is that we now have a rebooted Star Trek universe, and all the old continuity is largely thrown out, and so most of the canon can basically be ignored, at least as far as they're concerned, with one exception: Enterprise. Scott Bakula's prematurely canceled, boring as hell Enterprise is the only Star Trek series that still exists in the new timeline. And that's why I think, in order to really frame what Discovery both succeeds at doing and fails at doing, is not to compare it to the original series or The Next Generation or Voyager or Deep Space Nine. The only Star Trek show that you should really think of it as its contemporary, because it's the only one that really exists in the same time frame, it's the only one that it really needs to reference, is Enterprise. And structurally, in concept, there's some similarities, especially in the fact that they're both prequels. It's how they go about approaching that is where they're very radically different. It took me a long time to finally get around to watching Enterprise and to finally learn to appreciate it. When it first came out, I was excited and literally was watching it on the very opening premiere night with some friends. And I walked out of the room in the middle of that fucking opening credits scene and basically just hung out in the backyard and smoked cigarettes until it was over. And it was time to go home. It was terrible. That opening fucking song, it's been a long road getting from there to here. It completely turned me off. And it's weird that like something little like that could do that, but to me it defined the entire tone of what they were going for, and instead of some sweeping cinematic open vistas symphony music, it's this very, very honky tonkish, very post 9/11 feeling type music. I mean, I'm really shocked there wasn't a line in there about like, where were you when the towers fell, kind of stuff, you know? So, and finally, when it came out in later years, it got pushed onto cable syndication after it got canceled. I ended up catching bits of it on the Sci-Fi Network, which were easy to watch because sometimes I'd come in and the episode would already be on, so it'd be just kind of jumping into it. And then I finally discovered it on DVD, where I could just fast forward it, and then DVRs got better, and eventually got to a point where the credits were no longer an issue. I still, unfortunately, have that whole damn song locked in my head now, and I don't like the fact that I know the lyrics to that song. But that's life. Maybe only like 1 out of 4 episodes was good. The character cast was either bland or underused or overused. I think Trip was used too much. Reed was never really allowed to brought to his full flower of what his character could have been. I always wanted more with Hoshi. I think Phlox got a little too much focus. Paul definitely got a lot of focus, but you know, she was cast for a reason. They just went ahead and started off with the 7 of 9 casting from the first episode with this one, hoping that would keep some of the audience paying attention. And Archer himself, I try to justify him by thinking like, well, it's Starfleet's first real long range mission. They're going to be meeting all these new races. They don't want to put anyone too terribly intense out. They want to show mankind's best, nicest, handshakiest typeface. And in that regard, Archer's a good choice. But he never really felt like he had any balls. And I'm in the camp of people who don't like the third season. I really did not care for the Xindi storyline. There are a few good episodes buried within it, but overall, I just didn't care for it. It was too heavy-handed, a 9/11 analog, especially with how they were having Archer act. He didn't get a spine. He was just basically like turned into Jack Bauer, and that Star Trek was ripping off the show 24 there for a season with him torturing people and breaking a lot of his own moral codes and crap because he's got to save the Earth from mass destruction, which is never ever mentioned again in the entire history of Star Trek moving forward, that this happened to Earth at one time. And yeah, you'd think the Xindi would be a bit more of a notorious race in the aftermath. So that was kind of the problem with Enterprise to me is they had the setup where like, okay, this is going to be the very original Enterprise, the very dawn of the Federation. We're going to meet all the core races. And then they spend a shit ton of episodes having us meet all these species that we had never seen or heard of before and getting involved in plot lines that had very little ramification on the future and all the stuff we were already used to. And every once in a while we'd get good episodes where like, hey, the Andorians, and hey, the pig dudes, what the hell they were called, Tellarites and Vulcans, and hints of the Romulans, although I did like that they made a point that they never had any direct interaction with each other and all that kind of stuff. But that should have been the whole series. The third season Crisis shouldn't have been the Xindi. The third season Crisis should have been the war with the Romulans that had been mentioned in the original series and stuff like that. And that would have been, they could have done all that stuff, and then the fourth season and fifth season could have been the beginning of the Federation. It just could have been timed a lot better. It was just slow, boring, a lot of rip-off episodes. They ripped off the Galileo 7. They ripped off the Land of Troyes episode kind of with Trip. I mean, there's just lots of just self-recycling of material because there's the same production company that had already produced something like 700 episodes of Star Trek is trying to come up with new Star Trek ideas, and it was stale. And over time, I've learned to make myself like it and accept it and find the good in it. And generally, I notice that the overall zeitgeist of the fans that I can see is that's, for the most part, pretty much how most other people feel, and have probably very similar path to what I just described. Of you're resistant to it at first for a couple of reasons, and there were some diehards that stuck with it, but obviously not enough since it wasn't able to stay on the air. I mean, Voyager managed to make it through to its seventh season, and people constantly bitch about that show. And so now we have Discovery. Similar setup in that it's going to be a prequel. We're not going to try to continue the madcap, super high-tech technology BS that you'd find at the end of the TNG era. We're going to have it be a little bit more simplified and go for some of that classic Star Trek vibe. We're trying to sell the overall image of Star Trek to a new generation. And so you don't necessarily want to get too far away from the core tropes. Like you want to have Klingons as your bad guys and all that kind of stuff. So they threw themselves into it, and then they took the opposite tack of Enterprise in many ways. Their episodes are very frantic, and I find it funny. I did an interview with a coworker who's watched a few episodes of Discovery and abandoned it. And she's like the perfect age, and the fact that she's a girl and all that kind of stuff, she's like exactly what the target demographic that Star Trek Discovery was trying to reach. And she didn't like it because she thought it was boring. And I asked a few follow-up questions since then because I was thinking about that in particular. And it seems a good chunk of it is the frantic pacing that's supposed to compensate for the audience needing to have their attention filled constantly is breaking all the tension and all the resonance. There's no build up, there's no stakes. The action's just there all the time, and so you're numb to it, and so it doesn't really feel like anything. It's just, oh, running down another hallway. That's just what life is in the future. It's running down hallways and panels exploding. And there's just so many contrived plot twists and scenes that are all so mashed together and cut between each other that you don't really know what characters to follow. I mean, the show's supposed to be about Michael Burnham, but like you're never able to really establish any empathy with her. Yeah, there's no stakes. Not that the episode, like they're in the plot structure, but you don't feel them because you've been made numb by all this nonsensical stuff. And so here she is, a millennial, and there's this show that's been crafted by all this marketing research that's supposed to appeal to her generation, and it's not appealing to her generation. To me, that's my ultimate real thesis about the fact that you have properties like Star Trek and Star Wars and a few others. They're focused so hard on catching this new young market that they're chasing away all their old fans. And to top it off, not only are they chasing away the old fans, but nothing of what they're doing to capture the new market is working. The new market isn't interested either, but the new market will go back and watch the old stuff that the old fans liked and get into it. She totally likes the next generation, which by modern standards should be like considered just terribly boring and cheesy to a modern audience. I think it might be in part because of high definition cameras, but like they're constantly chasing this dragon and having everything be like hyper realistic and gritty looking, and you want your sets to be realistic, and you want your aliens to be realistic, and they're forgetting that these are theatrical plays on film, and the audience doesn't actually need all that. We're sitting in front of a box, a little square, whether it's a television or your computer screen or you're looking at your phone. You are very much aware that you're watching total fantasy, and you don't need it to look exactly like things look. That's why people can go back and still watch the Star Trek from the 60s, and even with all the fucking bright candy-colored buttons and all that kind of stuff and levers, you can still accept it. The aliens, just because it's just some fucking face paint and some nose ridges, you can accept it. It doesn't have to look like some tentacled monster or Cthulian beast in order for like, it's finally realistic. The audience is a participant in the thing that they're watching. You go in prepared to buy into the fantasy of it. And so you're focusing too much on trying to satisfy needs that they don't have because you've been lied to by your marketing department. And I believe it's really the marketing departments in both the corporate world and to extension, the political scientists, marketers, and who manipulate the people who run for government are where the source of a lot of our problems in our society are coming from, because they're the ones who are able to implant their political agendas and do all the core directives of how people are presenting their, here's our agenda for you to vote on, or here's our products for you to come and buy and consume. They've been told that the audience wants all this shit that the audience actually doesn't really want. And they have this backwards thing where they cynically think that if we can change what the people are consuming, it'll change the people, not realizing that that's putting the cart before the horse kind of a thing. It's only as the people change as will alter what's being consumed kind of a thing. I could have said that better. Anyway, Star Trek Discovery does not start off with a song that completely just makes me want to fucking throw down the goddamn remote control. Its characters, while they do not get nearly enough focus on who they all are or even tell us all their names, are at least not so goddamn bland looking. Just by looking at them, it's like, ooh, fucking alien robot girl and Saru's badass and all that kind of stuff. Are we ever going to see anything that where we actually get to know what Doug Jones really looks like, or is he always going to be basically playing Ape Sapien in different color schemes? I guess ultimately, both good things and bad things about Discovery can be traced to it being a counter reaction to the failure of Enterprise to hold an audience. I think there might be a subconscious resentment of the fact that Enterprise is the only show that's canon anymore now, that they've erased the original series from time, they've erased The Next Generation from time, they've erased Deep Space Nine from time. That since at the end of Star Trek 2009, they did not do any time thing to fix what had happened. They just allowed it to continue, and that entire timeline slowly just. Does Tuvok ever get even born? Without Tuvok, that alters the events of Star Trek Undiscovered Country, because Tuvok was a crewman on that ship, as was established retroactively. It's a butterfly kind of effect thing. Like the entire future is very different because of Spock going back in time. 2009 movie is so fucking terrible. But we're fucking stuck with it now, aren't we? They're never going to make a public announcement saying, ignore these things, they're not canon anymore. They're part of the product. Everything moving forward is going to have to incorporate this somehow into what's going on. I don't know if Discovery can never be made better. I have misgivings and very mixed feelings about Alex Kurtzman being so much in charge of everything now. Maybe one of these other shows might be able to be good. I have the most hope for an animated series because Kurtzman's best stuff has been his kids' things. So, this is the world we live in. Now, anyway, I guess thanks for sticking around through my random Star Trek ramble. I guess at the core, my central theme is that Discovery and Enterprise are the ones that need to be compared with each other. If you're going to be comparing Discovery to anything else, it's got to be Enterprise. And on that measurement, even despite all the stuff that's weird and fucked up and off-center about Discovery, it's a little bit better than Enterprise.